I'm Tara Grenovd with the Grounding and Growing Leadership podcast powered by Align, and this is episode number 4. Most of us have never really learned how to set healthy boundaries, and it shows. In this episode, our boundaries expert Pamela helps us understand what boundaries are, why they're important, and where to begin.
Welcome to the Grounding and Growing Leadership podcast, where everyone is a leader and leadership starts with you.
I'm Tara.
And I'm Pamela.
Thanks for listening today, and thank you for inviting us along on your leadership journey. Pamela, we're going to talk about something that you are somewhat of an expert in, if you would allow me to say, and something that we deal with in coaching probably on a daily basis, which is boundaries. Yeah. It's a hot topic right now. There are a lot of people talking about boundaries. I think that there's a lot of confusion about what a boundary is and what it isn't. And it would be helpful for people to understand what it looks like to put healthy boundaries in place at work. And so maybe we could just start with you talking about what is a boundary and why does it seem to be such a hot topic right now?
I think it's a hot topic right now because people use it in a toxic way, in a hurtful way, and when they don't understand what it is. But we also are talking a lot around toxic people. And so they'll say, I have to set up a boundary around this toxic person. But perhaps what they are saying is that means that I'm going to block them from my phone or I'm going to unfollow them on Facebook. And so there's the social part of all of that, which could absolutely be. But it also doesn't allow for actually staying in a relationship with someone, because boundaries actually help you stay in a relationship that is healthy for you and healthy for the person, the team, your life, basically, where you have set up accountability for yourself that is proactive. And so a boundary is a proactive, really, accountability for yourself that allows you to live true to your value and essentially loving yourself well and the things that are on your priority list for yourself first, so that I can love you well, so that I can work with my team well, so that I can show up for my family well. If I don't have a boundary or a parameter or a lane of values that I'm living out of, people will take from me whatever I'm willing to give them. And so when that happens, my teammate suffers, my husband suffers, my family suffers, I suffer, because I will be who you need me to be for you at my expense. And then everyone has access to all parts of me. When I know that I'm in a certain dynamic and I'm a leader, there are those that get that first access close time. And that's an appropriate boundary that I set, because I cannot serve everyone, but I can do for one or two who are in my close leadership team. It's not that I don't like people who are the rest of those that are on my team. I just simply don't have the capacity for that. And so what happens then is that those one or two other people within my team can disseminate all the help that is needed for the rest of the team, but I can't physically, emotionally, relationally help you as well as I can if I allow other people to do that for me. And so while I want to, as a connected relator, have people have access to me and I could serve everyone, if I don't set that boundary, it won't help me and ultimately won't serve you well.
So, that's a really good example. Those are a really good example of what a boundary might look like in the workplace. And I think you said it really well from the beginning, which is one of the reasons it's a hot topic right now is there's a toxic twist on
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
And I think we are using the word boundary for something that isn't a boundary, which is I'm going to ghost, I'm going to block, I'm going to sarcastically demean and cut something out of my life without ever explaining it or helping someone else understand what could have been different.
And it all comes from a place of being reactive rather than proactive when you're doing that. And really, a boundary is, if I'm using it in a relationship, I am loving me well so that I can love you well. And so it still allows for a relationship, but in context that I've realized that I need to define, because I'm a limited human with limited capacities. A wall is fear-based. A boundary is loving. But when you put up a wall that's fear-based, that absolutely cuts you out. And there are some unsafe, abusive people that have had access to your life. It may be a family member. Again, I'm a counselor. So, never am I going to put people in a place where I am saying that you need to provide space for this person because that is loving. That absolutely is not loving. That is not safe for you. Until trust is rebuilt, if at all, then it's absolutely appropriate to be able to have a very well-defined barrier between you and anything abusive. So please hear me in that. But if I am ignoring you, that is not a boundary. If I am ghosting you, that is not a boundary. If I am talking about you behind your back, you're still in my sphere of thought process. And so I'm actually not loving you well because I then enter into the toxicity that you are baiting me into. So actually what I am is I'm moving out of my insecurity, my anger, my bitterness, my pettiness. And it's way more of my issue than yours, probably. And so boundary is about something that you are doing for yourself that is healthy. And it does obviously speak to relational dynamics that we have to untangle in our lives.
So we're going to get into some pragmatics around the workplace. But before we do that, I want to ask a question about something you just said. And that is that a boundary allows me to love myself while providing a space to love someone else as well.
Yes.
So for people who struggle to put boundaries in place because they are not used to asking for things for themselves, how do you begin working with someone who is struggling in that area?
Yeah, I first just want to give you permission to realize that self-care is not selfish. One of the greatest things we can do is to show ourselves self-compassion and to pay attention to what our different aspects of being a human needs are. That I have very real emotional, relational, physical, spiritual, vocational needs. And if I give those things away to be validated by another person, then I will not be living true to myself. If I show up with trying to manage a perception of what you need me to be for you, then I'm truly not being myself. And what I do is I put a barrier from actually feeling the connection that I want to have in my life. And so it may feel like it's really selfish to go to the gym or spend time working on a certain aspect of your life or getting a coach. These things feel very indulgent when actually what you're doing is training yourself to be the best human that you can be so that you can love others well. If you aren't paying attention to those things, everyone else's intention will be thrown on you. You will become exhausted. You will most likely become sick because you can't manage everyone else's expectations. And you will find yourself not being able to sustain in a certain relationship, family dynamic, or workplace long term because it just frankly will crush you.
I've learned both through in working with you, but also in the work that we do, I've learned that when I find myself consistently frustrated with something or someone, it is likely because I haven't set a boundary.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we work with in coaching often is people frustrated with workload.
Yeah.
And because there is this dynamic happening where there are people who maybe used to have good boundaries and the circumstances have changed and things got really intense and they had to or felt they had to drop a number of those boundaries to get things done. And now they're in this mode of carrying way more than they're capable of sustaining. At the same time, there are people who are in the workplace who have no interest in carrying that load and instead put up a wall.
Yeah.
And it's not a boundary, it's a barrier or a wall, as you said.
Yeah.
And so they're quiet quitting.
Yes. Yeah. And the team is suffering.
And the team is suffering. So you're seeing more and more extremes in the workplace where there's more people who maybe are suffering from a lack of boundaries. And then there's people who are quiet quitting. And in the middle is maybe your team trying to survive or your business trying to survive. So if you're someone who's carrying more than your own fair share, what are some practical boundaries that you've seen work well for a team or for a person in the workplace?
Well, I want to start with a place of communication. You were talking about being able to have a boundary with a team. So, really, it is about sharing of the responsibilities. If I can use the example, because we are right now in the middle of football season, and you see everyone has their position. And so they uniquely train and manage and know where they start on the field. They know what the play is. But when the play is in play, the ball is in play, they are covering, they are looking for holes. Everyone is in a place that they are very aware of what will initiate a win for them. And if everyone is not aware of that, and if we have players that would just stand there after the ball is snapped, it's going to be very obvious that that team player not only is not in the game, but perhaps needs to be sidelined for a while. Now, I know that's an extreme, but it does, if you put it in that word picture, it does show you that without communication of knowing exactly what my role is and how I need to train myself and be a learner so that I show up prepared. If I was a player on the field, I would be training my body during the week. I would be doing all the things personally to get me ready for that game day. And we have projects and we have things that we're accomplishing as a company that looks like game days some days, but a lot of days that it is training for the big project or doing things that are going to lend our team to have a win. So communicating what my role is and what a win looks like for me is important. Now, some people train, like I have my best hours in the morning. So for me, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to be taking calls from 5 o'clock until 9 o'clock in the morning, or I'm going to on Slack, I'm going to put on do not disturb. And what I want my team to know in the communication process is that unless it's an emergency, a real life, like we're bleeding out emergency, please do not call me during this time because that's the time when I'm the most creative, the most awake. I always say I can change the world between 5 and 9 in the morning. And so you will interrupt our team's productivity if you do that. If you call me during that time and you know it's an emergency, I will answer unless I'm on another emergency call. However, if you do call me just to say something trivial, or it is not a bleeding out emergency, I will then have to communicate with you and to say, I need you to know that this was the timeline that we set up. This was a boundary so that I could work most creatively for our team. And I am going to lose trust in the fact that either I'm not communicating well or you're not hearing well. And when I start to lose trust, I call trust a deposit bank, and you're taking out way more than you're putting in. The trust bank is full when you don't call me during that time. But if you take from there and it's not appropriate, you're withdrawing. I am going to have to start putting things in place to rebuild trust again with you. That's communication. I have to be willing to communicate that and have those hard conversations. But then I also want to know from my teammate, hey, when are your best hours? And maybe that teammate has never held a boundary. As a leader, I want to model what that is. I'm not being selfish. I'm not off eating bonbons during that time. This is my most creative time, and I'm trying to model that for you. So again, that means that we have a further conversation. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. I see that. I see leaders trying to put a boundary in place around when they will or won't take meetings, around when they will or won't be available. And then team members maybe not honoring that boundary. And in some cases, it's because it hasn't been communicated well.
Yeah.
But in others, it's because they're not enforcing their own boundary. Well, they called. And so now the boundary's done. It wasn't really a boundary, it was a request.
Right. Yeah.
So that was a request that wasn't honored. And you can feel whatever way you're going to feel about it. But if you're not willing to enforce the boundary, not truly a boundary.
Yeah. Yeah. And you talk about the rules of the road. We know that we need to drive on the right-hand side unless we are in another country. And if I go off the edge, I know what the speed limit is. You could call all of these things boundaries, but I also want you to see those things as safeguards. And so as a company, if you don't have safeguards in place for who you are, what you value, when you work, when we take calls, how we treat each other, if you haven't laid those things out, it's a free for all. It's the Autobahn minus the lanes. And then you crash and burn. And so this is good communication. Again, it's loving to know what the speed limit is, how I can get from here to there safely, what it looks like when we celebrate a win. When we get to our destination, then this boundary that we put in place is something that we celebrate, not something that we're using as a negative noun or verb, depending on how we use it.
Yeah, I think the way it's being used in culture right now, it ends up being a negative because it's not being done in a healthy or even true way. And I think there's the time management boundary around, okay, here's what I need and here's what you need based on what you were just talking about. I love that you're talking about role clarity. Role clarity is really good boundary setting, as well as defining success and what done looks like. A lot of the work I do on strategic planning with teams is really, are we really clear about what crossing that finish line looks like? So when we're talking again in 3 months about this short-term goal, are we all going to be on the same page about, yes, that's been completed? And that can be a good boundary, is just being really clear about what the priorities are for an organization.
Yeah.
A lot of businesses, does not matter the size. I see this with solopreneurs and I see this with corporate companies with over 10,000 employees, have trouble with truly focusing on priorities and prioritization and being willing to say, not for now. Yes, it's a great idea. It's not for now.
It's even funny that you use the word priorities because it's priority. Like, I know it's hard to make many things a priority.
It's true.
Yeah. And so again, even having a singular thing, whatever your priority is, but for a certain block of time or a project or a person, a relationship, a goal that you have for yourself, in all of those areas, it's important to write down, make it plain to yourself and to others that this is a priority right now. And everything else, all of the yeses and nos, get filtered underneath this priority or this loving, healthy boundary, this clear boundary that we've set so that we can be successful. And so, again, in business, I don't want the crossover of the toxic use of this word to cross over into a place that actually could be something really healthy.
So the other dynamic that I see from time to time is someone on a team gets serious about setting healthy boundaries. And then the person who has not yet learned this gets really resentful. Why do they get to have a boundary?
Yeah. What you're talking about is classic kind of codependent work dynamics, it sounds like. And when a person is starting to be untangled from being codependent in a relationship, and again, a codependent person is someone that takes on the unnecessary and inappropriate control of another person, basically, of their environment, of their happy, of the things that they are struggling with, because their success means your success. And within that, then they become enmeshed and they become entangled. And there's no differentiation between you and me. It is an unhealthy we. And so you're describing a person that sounds like they haven't learned how to differentiate or declare their values for themselves. It's actually envy that they're seeing a person who has established some boundaries and they're starting to grow, and this other person doesn't know how to grow. And so they're asking themselves the question, how do I get some of that? When I first started coaching, I had some people who hired me to be their gatekeeper. So I would take the calls. And the reason that they hired me initially was because they didn't know how to say no. Now, I constantly had them repeat to themselves, when someone asks you to do something from a volunteer or a work project level that you can't, to say, thank you so much for asking. I would have to take something else off my plate in order to say yes to that. Now, what typically happens is that the person hears it and they've just heard a no, but in their head, they're going, I want some of that.
Yeah.
And from a work dynamic, you can do the same thing, because you can say, I love that you're proposing this. This is my workload right now. So tell me, what do you want me to take off my plate so that I can do that for you? So this person that was setting up a healthy boundary is learning how to do that. The one who hasn't learned how to do that is the codependent person saying, I will be who you need me to be for you at my expense, at the expense of my health and my time and my relationships and my joy. And the one who is setting up, knowing what is on their plate, is able to start to begin to thrive in all of those areas. I encourage you to do the work, to discover what that can look like for yourself.
Yeah, I think when we receive that initial pushback on our boundaries, because in some cases, there are people benefiting from your lack of boundaries.
And taking advantage without being malicious.
Yeah, just they don't even realize it
Right.
potentially. They haven't stopped to think about that if you had a boundary, they wouldn't be benefiting in this way. So when you set a boundary, they may not thank you for it, may push back. They may even get frustrated or hurt. And so I think part of the work around being able to set truly healthy boundaries is to be prepared and expectant
Yeah.
for that so that you know how you're going to handle it when someone pushes back. To say, I'm going to set these 4 new boundaries and it's going to go great, and not be prepared for how you're going to handle the pushback, I think is setting yourself up for failure around those.
Yeah. And communication, it really comes back to that as well. I would just caution you. I think there are other words that you can use instead of the word boundary.
Sure.
Because it's such a hot topic right now. It would almost be like leading in with, hi, I am so and so from this political party. I mean, you just wouldn't do that. And so I believe that you can say, I need to set up some guidelines and accountabilities for myself because I've realized that I work the best at this hour. And I know this is going to affect you. And so I want you to know that in the beginning, this might be really hard because we're changing the dynamic of when we can communicate. But I'm here for you to communicate. It's just that my available hours have changed. You are really important to me. But if we can do it during these hours, I need to block this time off for this guideline because this allows me to work best in that space. So you're still saying to them, you are of value to me, and this is where I need to have the communication done.
And there are some times where, because of the kind of work that you do, or because of your work setting, you don't have the ability to set some of those boundaries. So I think some of it is within the guidelines of how you're serving clients.
Yes.
Or how you're producing. What can you do? I want to speak specifically to leaders. Research shows that the best way for leaders to help the mental health of their employees is to model good mental health practices.
Yeah.
Your words do not matter. Your actions absolutely do. And so are you modeling as a leader good, healthy, whether you want to call them boundaries, prioritization, tensions? And one of the ways that we can see this is, and I'm guilty of this myself, I get up really early. I am best in the morning. And because I have small children, I have learned that if I get up at 4, I've got about an hour and a half to 2 hours before anyone can take the time away from me. Meaning, if there's a weather closure because we live in Minnesota and it's winter, if the kids are sick, whatever, I have guaranteed hours in the morning. So I'll send emails sometimes at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I have clients on the West Coast, which means they're getting it at 2 in the morning. And I've got a subcontractor who's in Florida who's seeing that different times. So I know that sometimes leaders are working at all hours and maybe either don't have great boundaries or truly are working at their best at midnight. And we are unintentionally telling people how we want to be, how we want them to work.
Yeah.
When we're communicating at times that aren't necessarily appropriate or healthy. So can you just speak to either some techniques or tools or technology that might help with that kind of boundary?
Well, simply email. You can set it to go out at a certain time. So
I need you to show me how to do that.
I know. In the Google Workspace, like you can have it set so that everything goes off at 8 o'clock at a specific time zone to whenever you need it to go.
Sure.
You can set the guideline ahead of time so that you are not texting after a certain hour unless literally somebody is bleeding out. There's no reason for that. And also what I want leaders to do is to celebrate relational health. And I have been guilty of this with not taking vacations when you have vacation time because there is just too much to do. But when leaders celebrate the fact that someone actually took the time off that they needed to take, it tells the rest of the team that is what they are desiring. That's what it's there for. When somebody goes ahead and sets up time to go see a counselor, a mental wellness coach, or meet with a coach, that a leader verbally celebrate the fact that they have 55 minutes with someone that is away from their project list and their to-do list and that they are growing themselves and they celebrate that. And so technology can help you, and also leadership modeling and sharing that with your team is a huge way to help and model that as well.
Well, Pamela, I think boundaries will continue to be a hot topic. It's probably something we'll come back to, but
Yes.
hopefully, if you're listening today and you've been wrestling with an area where you're frustrated, where you're feeling burnt out, where you're maybe feeling some resentment, it's probably a clue that there's a boundary or a guideline or an intention that needs to be set. And if you need help with that, reach out. We would love to provide some resources for you. Or if you are trying or actively working on enforcing a boundary, share your wins with us. We'd love to celebrate with you.
Yes.
I mean, sometimes it's a small and not so small. Pamela just put one on around her schedule. No
Yes.
meeting Mondays.
Yep.
And we're celebrating.
Yep.
Starting in March, she's going to have no meeting Mondays. And that's going to be exciting for her calendar and free up a lot of creative space.
We are so grateful that you took your time to be able to join us today on this conversation with boundaries. We look forward to hearing from you, and I want you to know that you can sign up at aligntransform.com to be getting a newsletter updating you on the topics that we have for our podcasts that are coming out. That's also a way to share feedback with us and to give us perhaps some topic ideas of what you would like us to speak on. But we hope that this has been a topic that's been beneficial for you, and we look forward to sharing this podcast space with you the next time.
Come on.